Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Future of Education. It's the 21st of February, and our special guest's phone is ringing. His name is Maurice Gibbons, and he is the author of the Self-Directed Learning Handbook. Maurice, thanks so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Steve.
The Future of Education is a Web 2.0 Labs project. Thanks to Mighty Bell and Blackboard Collaborate for their support. Coming up this year, we have some really fun worldwide virtual conferences. These are all free events. They start March 28th with the School Leadership Summit. They're built around peer-to-peer learning. And so these are school leaders teaching each other. There's still time to submit a proposal if you're interested. That's at schoolleadershipsummit.com. At ISTE, we're doing some really fun stuff for the 7th year. We call it ISTE Unplugged. It's all crowdsourced activities, and it starts the Saturday before with Hack Education, an all-day unconference that Audrey Waters is going to help facilitate this year. Then coming up in July is the Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math Worldwide Conference, which will be at stemxcon.com. It's not up yet. And then for the 3rd year, our Library 2.013, the Future of Libraries virtual conference, thanks to San Jose State University. Recently heard this referred to as the biggest, best-known conference in the library world. That's a huge credit to all of you who've participated in that. Plus then the Global Education Conference in November, our mothership, 5 days, 24 hours a day, 400 to 500 sessions. Again, all teachers, students teaching each other. Coming up on the Future of Education tomorrow, Michael Fullen on education reform and the change process. Monday, Richard Millington at an early hour. Also, Michael's at an early hour as well, so check at futureofeducation.com for that. Richard Millington on social community management. Gavin Dykes on Tuesday on student voice. Roger Shank on cognitive science and learning on Thursday. Then into March, we've got lots of fun. You can see new on this list, Peter Gray on Free to Learn, Elliot Washer on Leaving to Learn, Ernie Turner and Simona David on Improving Schools One Community at a Time, a fascinating project taking place in Romania, and Will Richardson to come on and talk about his short book, Why School. Anyway, lots coming up. Hope you'll join us for one. If you've missed any shows, they are all recorded. A fascinating show with Alan November this week. Before him, Laura Grace Walden on free-range learning, Carol Black on Occupy Your Brain, Stephen Bezruchka on poverty and education. Anyway, lots coming up. These are all recorded in full Blackboard Collaborate form and an MP3, and they are available for your listening pleasure. So this is the chance where our live studio audience gets to indicate where they're participating from. Look for the star to the left of the map. Double-click on it, and then click on the map. Give a shout-out in the chat. Let us know the time, the temperature, your mood, whatever you want to tell us. And you know what I'll do here, Gail, is I'm going to turn my audio down just a bit. You can turn your audio up, and it should be that Maurice and I match. I'm reluctant to tell anybody that I'm actually on the island of Maui right now. I wish it were a vacation, but I am working. However, I am headed to New Zealand and Australia in the next month, so anxious to return to Australia, my first time in New Zealand. Please keep putting your information in the chat. We're going to move forward here. There is a Mighty Bell space for this show. Mighty Bell is the content curation service that Gina Bianchini has started. She was the co-founder of Ning. I really like Gina. I do consulting work for her, so there's full disclosure there. But if you want to keep the conversation going about self-directed learning and Maurice's work, you can go into that Mighty Bell space. It's also listed on the futureofeducation.com blog post for tonight's show. So, Maurice, we had an experience in, I do a weekly podcast with Audrey Waters called Hack Education, and we had an experience a couple of months ago that was sort of it was very moving and also sort of transformative of our thinking about education. And it was a description of her son who had just graduated from high school and his complete inability to feel like he could direct his own life. And she was open about this with his permission. And we started asking this question: do most students graduate from secondary or high school with a sense of being self-directed? And unfortunately, I think the answer is no, isn't it?
I believe so. I remember when my son graduated, a group of about 16 of his friends gathered in the living room, and my son asked me to come in, and he said, Dad, all of us have just graduated from school, and we haven't the faintest idea what to do next. And so we sat for most of the afternoon and talked about what to do next. And they were very confused. They had never thought about what was going to come next. I'm sure some of them had, but they didn't have plans, and a lot of them took a long time to find their way.
So you were sort of thinking about this when, if I got the history correct, you watched this movie called Walkabout. Can you describe that experience? Well,
it wasn't the Walkabout was like the inciting incident. It wasn't the formative incident. In the sense, it gave me the metaphor I needed. It didn't give me the idea. The idea started when I was a kid. We were quite poor, and my mother was scrubbing floors in the quite rich area nearby, and they had troubled children. So they asked, she said, well, my son's pretty good with kids. Why don't you let him work with them? So I worked with a number of young kids, and they were all troubled. They had everything, but they were all troubled. And they didn't seem to have any sense of themselves or where they were going. And then I worked for the YMCA and did a lot of consulting with kids, a lot of work with teams and things like that. And I just got a real sense about kids. I worked a lot on, when I first started teaching, I just worked a lot on with young people who were in the troubled areas of town. So I got a real insight into the struggles kids were going through and the trouble they were having in becoming people, really. They didn't seem to have a sense of direction or a sense of morality or a sense of what was interesting or what they wanted to do, and they didn't have ideas, which I thought was kind of scary. So when I got to teaching, I started to think, well, what is it that kids need that they're not getting? And it seemed to me that they were not getting the kind of experience that caused them to turn inward and find out who they were by what they were doing, or to find out who they were and then to do things that developed that. So I started to think about, and as a teacher, I started to experiment with ways that I could get kids involved. And we had kids on a creative weekend where they planned the program. This is the high school kids. They planned the program, and it was all based on the idea of being creative and imaginative. So they they said what they wanted speakers on and that sort of thing. And they were the usual things. They wanted one on philosophy and sex, and on developing a career, and being a good person, and things like that. I was very impressed, and I found people who were willing to do that, and the conversations that followed were sensational. And it moved me very deeply because the kids were very authentic when they were in charge, and the teachers who sat in on all the groups were not in charge. They were members and participants. And at the end, in the evaluations, which were all very good and very thoughtful, one person said, this is the greatest weekend that I have ever been on, and it was a weekend in which my teachers became my friends, and my friends became my teachers. And I thought, whoa, that's pretty much a theme that I'd like to develop. And so when I did went on and started to do my graduate work and later started teaching at the university, I started doing research and work in this area. And it was then that I started to think, oh, right, how can I create a program around which will provide young people with the opportunity and the focus to develop their own direction and their own responsibility and their own personality and their own vision. And then that's when I thought of, I saw the movie, and the movie just clicked. I thought, wow, here is a test that is perfectly designed for those people. I've been in Australia, I'd seen the Aboriginal people and talked with some of them, and I understood what they had tried to do. And when I saw the movie and saw that the children going out into the outback in their little private school outfits, carrying their briefcases, and being totally lost and unable to survive, and here comes an Aboriginal boy who's perfectly adapted to this circumstance and saves their lives. And I thought, so here is a primitive culture that has found a way, a perfect test for their young people. He was about 16, and he's out and perfectly equipped and able to feed himself, find water, find his direction, and make his way home. And if he can't get home, well, he can't be much use to the tribe anyway. So this is a survival thing, and you can imagine the preparation that the tribe gives that young man before he goes out into the outback. So I thought, this is a perfect training for that situation. And it occurred to me, what would be an equally perfect situation for our youth in graduating? And that's when I got the idea. That's what gave a formative nature to those ideas that I had.
In addition to the 3-day retreats that were planned by the students, you also mentioned drama and this How to Become an Expert program for middle school students.
Yes.
I'm particularly interested in the drama piece because it seems like that's been a thread through some of our interviews, that people whose voices are making a difference right now, like Ken Robinson, and you have a drama background. What's the tie there?
Well, it is that in order to present a character, you have to understand a character. And so understanding this character gives you also an opportunity to explore yourself and to try on personalities. So, if you're a character in Riders to the Sea, you have to get into the character who has lost her whole family on the sea. And they're fishermen, in curracs and the storms. If you've been to the Aran Islands, you see it's just grave after grave. Here lies the young men from this family who died at sea at this stage. And if you have to get into that kind of person, you really start to understand yourself. In order to present that person, you have to touch something of incredible sadness in yourself in order to express that sadness on stage. And that, I think, is one of those things. You start to become confident. And then, of course, you're presenting. You're on stage. You're taking a terrific risk. And I think that capacity to take a risk is very important to growth. And we don't have nearly enough opportunity for it. Not legitimate risk, anyway. We create risks, but they're not true risks, and everybody knows that.
So what's the difference between student-directed learning and teacher-directed learning?
Well, where to start? Let's just do the raw picture. In teacher-directed learning, the teacher selects everything. They select the goals. They select the content. They select the means of presentation and direct the means of learning. They evaluate the student's progress and are just in complete control of the learning experience. Well, in self-directed learning, that's all reversed. The student sets the goals. The student decides how he or she will learn it. And they decide on the process that they will use. And they evaluate their own progress, because that's an important part of learning. And so if you can imagine that, the role of the teacher in between that, on the one hand, is directing the content and directing the student, marching the student through that content, whereas on the other side, the teacher has to ask, how can I help the student to find his own direction, his own nature, his own style, and his own direction, and then to follow it efficiently and effectively. And so that means that on the one hand you're teaching content, on the other hand you're teaching process. And I think that seems to me to be the future, and especially now with the resources available to students, there's really no reason why a student shouldn't be able to give him or herself a degree.
You talk about the difference between necessary processes and assigned content. What do you mean by a necessary process?
Okay, well, listen, if you're assigned content, of course, is today we're going to discover the history of Germany. Assigned process is today we're going to learn how to set goals, how to set your own goals for yourself. That's process. And then, of course, everything that follows from that, learning how to plan, learning how to set up the action, how to take action. You see, the center of self-directed learning is action. It's taking action. It's not content. It's not just content for its own sake. It is content related to action.
It was interesting to me that you took several sort of current research trends, constructivism, social learning, motivation, and you looked at them from the standpoint of how we talk about them in teacher-directed learning, and then you asked us as the readers to rethink what that means in terms of self-directed or student-directed learning.
That's true. I think one of the most interesting things is a recent book by Baumeister and Turney called Willpower, and they're discussing the whole idea of self-control, self-management, which is, the essence of self-direction. And they're saying that it is the only reliable human trait for predicting success in the future. This is, I'm sorry. And so this is these are the kinds of trends that are just being strangely misinterpreted, in my view. I think the tendency, for instance, take personalized learning. Now that sounds like self-direction, doesn't it? But it's not. What it is more sensitive responsiveness to students so they more effectively absorb the content. And, it's the same with, I remember starting early when I was doing my doctoral work, I had to study individualized instruction, which was the current wave. But I found that, that the self-direction, independent learning, individualized instruction, where it occurred, it was like maybe a period on Friday. It wasn't a school tendency, and then it was often individualized instruction, of course, in learning the unit. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and I think that's what happens very often is that we hear about trends that are moving that sound as if they've been socialized or are interpreting the current research and educational trends and moving in the direction of more social, more personal learning, more learning that is, you would think, more self-directed. When I hear personalized, I think, hey, maybe they're moving towards self-direction. But when I look into it, no, that's not really it. Because self-direction starts with us, right at the core of who we are. If you're going to start self-directed learning that's going to come from the individual, it is a completely different idea, because now you become an associate of the individual. You're helping that person to discover the very essence of themselves, their strengths, their ideas, their imagination, the range of their ability. You're encouraging them to develop human characteristics. It is the natural way to develop character, because in being self-directed, it requires courage, determination, perseverance, insight, creativity, imagination. I mean, it is the essence of training for character. And you have to have character for self-direction, or you wouldn't be able to continue, because the essence of it is personal challenge. You progress by challenging yourself to move forward, and that's the essence of self-management too.
Peggy George asked the question in the...
I can just sort of ramble
No,
on
that's
here.
good. Peggy George asked the question in the chat that I wonder if it's instructive. She says, is self-discipline the same as self-control? And she may have meant, is self-direction the same as self-control? But it is interesting how self-discipline and self-control are phrases that kind of have a connotation of meeting somebody else's expectations on your behavior, whereas self-direction seems to be much more about setting your own path forward. Well,
here's a very interesting study that was done on self-regulation. A study was done offering 4-year-olds a marshmallow, and if they didn't eat the marshmallow for 15 minutes, they got another marshmallow. Well, a portion of them gobbled the marshmallow right away, a significant portion of them. Another portion waited, but just couldn't resist. Finally gobbled it before the 15 minutes was up, and then a group didn't, and collected their second marshmallow. Well, the researcher was living on the university campus, and so he had, through his own children going to school, he had some contact with these same students who were in the study. And he started to realize that there was an association between characteristics that they were developing and exhibiting and what they had done with the marshmallow. Those who gobbled the marshmallow right away were troublemakers. And this continued throughout life, and he did follow-up studies, and it showed that these people who lack self-control and self-management are going to be poorer performers in education. They're going to have a higher likelihood of criminal record, and so on. So what we're talking about when we're talking about these issues is the ability to direct oneself, the ability to manage one's behavior. It becomes very vivid in the marshmallow test.
Are you familiar with the follow-up test that was done? You're going to love this, because this was Bandura and Michelle, I think, at Stanford.
Yes.
And in a second set of tests, they actually trained students to have more self-control, and the students that they gave the training to had the same long-term outcomes as those who had shown it prior to the training.
That's fabulous. Will you email me that reference?
I will. It is really fun to hear that second part. Okay, so you talk about students gradually taking over the teaching operations. That's going to hit some people by surprise, right?
I think it's disturbing, and I think it's why it's so strongly resisted. I think, in regular education circles, and I understand that because it means quite a significant change in role, Also, the sort of basic idea of discipline is having children being obedient and the class an orderly class, even teenagers. And in self-direction, there's a lot more action. There's people moving around, there's people in groups discussing and talking. There has to be some flexibility in moving in and out of the school, and those kinds of things. So it is a major change, and it means learning a whole new set of skills as well. For instance, I think one of the main teaching skills is still teaching, but the other part of it is conferencing, meeting with students and being able to discuss with them in a way that is nurturing to the development of their own ideas. And that's a skill that really needs to be developed in order to be successful in this realm.
I hear a lot about whole child learning or whole student learning, and I'm wondering if your sort of focus on the self-reflective piece, the self-awareness and the metacognition, which I think is very closely aligned with your journaling recommendation. Is that what people mean when they talk about whole student, looking at the whole student?
There's within any of these concepts, there's a range of actual practice. And I've seen the same kind of range of practice here. And, to be honest, I'm not quite sure that I have ever seen a classroom that claims to be based on the whole child concept. Presumably, every teacher would say, I would certainly, even when I was teaching English, I would say, I'm a whole child teacher because I cared about my kids, and that sort of thing. But I don't think that implicit in the idea of the whole child is necessarily self-directed learning.
But there is a theme throughout the book of this sense of this not just being intellectual, but also being emotional and a part of the growth of an individual, the personal growth of an individual.
Well, if you look at somebody like Erik Erikson, who I think is still highly regarded, his theory of development was that we move from stage to stage. I think that's implicit in our development through life and the stages of life. And one, for instance, is the stage of adolescence when we have to develop an identity or experience role confusion. And if we don't develop an identity, we remain in role confusion and until we achieve that, if we ever do. So there are challenges at each level of life. And I believe strongly in that idea that we have to learn to move forward and to move forward on a regular basis and to move forward well. And that continues throughout life. That's my concern, is the inconsistency with the way people are in school, with the way they're going to be the rest of their lives. I think people should be learning to be self-directed like they are in kindergarten, or they used to be in kindergarten. I haven't been in one for a while, but they used to be very, very self-directed and full of action and activities and explorations and discoveries. And it seems to me that's the way school should be. We should be learning every day something we can use well for the rest of our lives. In fact, the system should be designed to promote successful life. And that's why I believe in self-directed learning, is because I think it cultivates who we are, it cultivates our skills and abilities, and it encourages us to develop a sense of what we can do well and becoming expert in some field of our choice, and growing up to be whole and developing human beings. It is a very emotional activity. It involves qualities of character that are very emotionally based, like, as I mentioned, courage, decisiveness, perseverance, and so on, which are great qualities, and qualities that not only enable us to resist gobbling our first marshmallow in order to get two, but also enable us to keep going even as we get older to pursue a wider and a deeper quality of life.
So I want to move to a discussion of implementation, because I think many people here will be interested in that. But before I do so, you do talk in the book about the role of passion and finding passions. Where do you land on this spectrum of sort of an inborn passion versus becoming good at something and having that become a passion because you're good at it?
I say yes and yes. Some people seem to have that natural drive. I don't know whether it comes from the family environment or what. I suspect we are really tabula rasa when we're born, except we have some inclinations that are of a general nature through our DNA. But it doesn't really matter, because if you have that, let's imagine that you do come with an imprint. Then it should be developed. You should discover it, find out about it as soon as you can, and start honing and developing it. But my sense is that people move from thing to thing, and that's okay. You know, I want to. It's like clubs. I do a lot of things, and I do some professionally for my salaries, and I do some just because I love to do them. And when I'm really lucky, what I do for work is also what I love to do. And that seems to me to be the way to go, is to seek those things to do that give you great pleasure, provide you with skill, and enable you to make a contribution. I think can I just develop that for a second? Because I think that
absolutely.
Thanks. I think there are really four things. The existentialists, when I was a young man, existentialism kind of hit me broadside, and with their sense that life is meaningless because we're born to die, and in a generation or two are forgotten even by family. So how do you give that strange thing, this brief thing, this spark in the great universal timeline of life that we have? How do you give it meaning? And it seems to me that this is as deep as that. That we learn to give life meaning by finding out who we are and can be, by finding out what we can do and what we will do, by extending the number and quality of relationships we have with others, and by making a difference in the world. And by that I mean that can be done by helping, by a small service, or it can be done by literally changing the world and feeding the hungry. And I think that this is what we're talking about. We're talking about people forming their lives, and it is a full-time job. And only a small portion of that is the work we will do. But discovering who we are from whatever source, or who we can, is the more important part of that is who we can be. And that's always a possibility in the future, not a certainty.
I'm struck by the degree to which, in order to go down this path, you need a caring adult who actually knows this path. I mean, that's sort of self-evident, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, it is. I believe that self-directed learning is a quality for the teacher as well as for the student, because for the teacher, they'll be finding a center in him or herself that is calm and assuring, and that enables them to look outside themselves and see each student as a forming individual who needs the opportunity and the assistance to find out who they are and who they will be.
So do teachers who begin to implement student-directed learning find that there is a pattern to the amount of effort and work that's involved? Does it start out with more work required and then end up being more sort of peaceful? Is there a way to describe the path?
Well, one way is to look at a place where self-directed learning is established, and that would be Jefferson County Open in Colorado. I haven't checked with them recently, but for years they have been a lighthouse for this practice, and took the ideas and made them their own and developed them in a way that has had really quite a profound effect on all their I was going to say all their students, but that of course isn't likely true. But certainly a very, very large percentage of them. There's a book about it, Lives of Passion, Schools of Hope. That was an interview of 800 or 900 students who graduated from the school and studied their responses to the experience they had and the quality of life that resulted. It was quite impressive.
I love this line from the book. Go ahead if you need to. Maybe that was me coming back to the speakers. I love this line in the book. A curriculum can be defined in a list of the competencies students are expected to perform.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's entirely possible. In fact, I think some teachers, although I haven't been close to schools for a while, so this is I have to admit that, and I'm not able to speak directly about this. But when I was developing curriculum and working with schools, and indeed in myself, was teaching myself, we often used a list of competencies that students were to develop, and then would provide opportunities for the students to develop those and encourage them in their achievement.
So there's the general ideas of the book around self-directed learning, but there are also some very sort of specific opportunities or recommendations for implementing. Can you tell us what a learning package is, what a personal plan is, what triads are, and what passages are?
Sure. Well, let's see. What was the first one?
Well, you can take them in any order, but I had written down, learning packages. Okay,
and then give me the list again. I wasn't really thinking.
Okay, the learning packages, personal plans, the peer support groups or triads, passages, student learning agreements, celebrations. There's kind of a structure here.
Yeah. Well, the package is, can you imagine a spectrum from the teacher-directed learning I described to the self-directed learning? If you imagine a spectrum of those, where on one hand we have a strictly teacher-directed, everything by the textbook, by the test, by the lesson, and the questions afterwards. Now, if we move away from that, we can move in degrees toward the other side, where the student is deciding the goals he or she is going to pursue and how he or she will pursue them. So one way in the spectrum of moving between those is to say, all right, we're going to still teach the content that you want taught, but we're not going to have lessons with a teacher standing in front. We'll create a package. For instance, at one of the local high schools, self-directed, they use this approach. I call it the self-managed approach, in which you're still doing the curriculum, but you're doing it in a personal and self-managed way with at regular opportunities to do your own unit. But they would, for instance, in a geology unit, there would be the need to develop a competency in identifying a range of minerals. And then there would be a box that would be a set of those minerals that they could study. And then there were sources that they could go to as guides to find out of what the characteristics were of the different minerals. And then there was a personal test at the end. Now, they still had to finish and write the science test, but they were able to go through the packages and learn the unit on their own. And that is more self-directed than the teacher standing in front and speaking that content to everybody. And it provides opportunity for individuals to find their own best way to learn as well. So that's the kind of learning package, but it's not strictly, self-directed as the way I described it earlier. The plan, the personal plan, is when you set your own goal and describe a plan. Well, we laid it out as we call it an action plan. It started with a vision. What is your vision of what you hope to achieve and to learn? What is it part of a larger vision you have for your own development? Then what is your goal? Let me just give you the simple form. What is your goal? What is your plan for achieving that goal? And then what would you be able to do? How will you and we as your teachers be able to assess the quality of the performance you've had in this action? So they present 3 levels, like or passing, ordinary, okay, got it done kind of thing, and then I did well, and then I was excellent. And that was the teaching plan. The triads are, the idea of being self-directed isn't everybody in a little corner by themselves. It is that we learn enormously from everybody, just like my art class that I just came back from, that I'm taking at a local university in the studio arts. I'm a sculptor, and we all, there are 16 of us, and we all have our individual projects. Some are metal, some are clay, some are wood, and so on. Some are stone, and everybody's working on their projects, all of them different, but we learn from each other. And we're constantly talking to each other, and as well as working on our own. And we have a master sculptor there commenting on our work and discussing it with us, and we have a tech to help us do it. So there's lots of, we all need lots of assistance, and we learn a lot from each other along the way. And part of the success of being self-directed is knowing how to find the person who can give you the best help. So, but we use triads as like a sort of order. We could teach goal setting, for instance, as a whole class. Then we go into small groups, into the support group, say, and we each set a group goal. And as they say, what you learn to do in a group, you can then do on your own. And then the third thing is, with that background, you then move to setting your own goals. So the triad is a learning operation. It also means that when you're setting your proposals, they they can listen to your proposals for your own actions, discuss it with you, ask you questions, help you to enrich it and develop it, and provide you with support and assistance. And you become a team helping each other achieve your individual activities. And that's very much a part of the self-directed world. So that's a triad. It's not necessarily a triad. It can be partners. It can be, up to 4 or 5, but not too many so that everybody gets airtime. Moving on to passages. So the passages are another name for the activities that you, in Jefferson County Open, they were the ones who introduced the word passages, I believe. And they use it for in the graduation program, where the students take on 6 challenge activities. I can't I'm not sure I can remember them all now. It's been a while, but it's adventure, business, work, practical applications, curiosity. There are a full range of fields, and the student has to plan an activity and demonstrate that it's a challenge. That is, that it moves them beyond the easy and familiar. It's kind of mythical in that sense. It's a hero's journey for each individual because it requires courage. And in that courageous act of going, for instance, to a dig in Mexico, you have to be courageous to take that risk, to step out of the easy and familiar. And you have to be confident that you will be able to handle yourself and be able to deal with the challenge of performing in those activities. So the passage then is what you do as your passage to adulthood. So you prove that you can go out and adventure and climb a mountain, but of course thousands of possibilities there. You can prove then, and in doing those activities, you demonstrate your readiness for graduation, your readiness to move on, not just from school, but to adulthood. The agreements. The agreements are like contracts you make with yourself, and it's the plan set in the form of a contract with yourself. Well, just a minute now. Maybe you mean with the agreements. The agreements that we make with ourselves. And those, remember Ruiz, the 4 agreements? There's also a set of agreements that we make in pursuing self-direction, agreements with ourselves, that we will be honest because, we are being honest with ourselves. That's the key, to be honest with yourself. And another agreement, for instance, is to take full responsibility. There is no one to blame. You are responsible for what happens in your life. And so it's agreements of that nature that provide the style that guide the student in pursuing the self-directed activity. Finally, the celebration. Hey, I've been to the celebration at Jefferson County Open, and it's quite spectacular because the students have really been through something. I sat in on one, a young girl had just gotten her pilot's license, and another guy had actually come from a dig in Mexico. Another group was celebrating, I'm just picking out one of the 6, was celebrating they'd been a flood in a river near where they were, and they'd been down helping a farmer dig out for 2 weeks, and things like that, because service is one of the very important passages. And the celebration is simply a recognition of the importance of this transition, that, when they know that they are not just graduating from school, they are moving from childhood to adulthood. And that is charged with meaning. And it is the goal, if you like, that school has, is to graduate people charging into life and charging into adulthood. So this is a celebration, and there's speeches and music and dancing and action, little dramatizations and that sort of thing. It's a grand thing to be there and see them all celebrating the things they've done, because they know what the others have done and admire it. And there's a grand feeling in this environment. It's quite different from the celebration that we usually
I want to
see.
move to Q&A in a minute, but before I do so, I want to ask you about a line in the book that has kind of a shadow that goes over when I read this line. It was, sometimes the dragon wins. Why does the dragon win sometimes?
Well, sometimes you just set your goal too high. Sometimes you find out a harsh reality about yourself. Sometimes people do rotten things to you. I mean, when I say sometimes the dragon wins, I mean sometimes things don't go your way. And you have to be able, you have to have the sense of confidence to be able to stand strong in those moments of storm.
There were several books that you referenced in your book that I thought, oh, I want to go buy that book. And I discovered they were mostly out of print and they were very expensive. Is there something there? I mean, is that telling us something that these really valuable works around self-direction and learning aren't in current editions? Is this still really a minority view?
Well, I suspect it is, but you have to recognize that everybody in school is going to be facing the challenge of self-direction, because the modern technology is putting everything in the student's hands. And there's no question that if a student wants to, he can do high school. I haven't checked this out exactly, but I know a number of universities provide high school courses and first-rate high school courses, and college. You can do college online. And a lot of some schools will also provide you with you can get a degree online as well. I believe also that what is coming in the future, and I'd even propose it, is that students become highly self-directed, that they keep a journal, which is like a record of their thinking and development and ideas, and that they keep a portfolio that is a demonstration of all the work that they've achieved, and that they start to think of it as a set of achievements that they are designing in order to represent themselves as the very best they can. I think it's a great way of thinking. I'm building this portfolio and a journal to describe the steps I've taken, and I have these proofs of what I have accomplished as a result. What more do we need in order to demonstrate that we have made great achievements? And what better motivation for doing them than assuming that we are building our lives and that our lives are public?
So Margaret makes a comment that I think should be our first question. If you have a question for Maurice, you can put it in the chat, or you can raise your virtual hand. That's the hand icon at the top of the participant window, and I'll give you the microphone. But Margaret says, we tried moderate student-directed learning, but the students wanted the teachers to tell them.
Wow, they've been well taught, haven't they?
Did I lose you there?
No, I'm just saying. I think that's a result. When I did my research and developed a self-directed classroom, like starting from nothing, one of the students said to me, well, what do you want me to do? Tell me and I'll do it. And I sat, this is my conferencing, and I sat and talked with him for a long time. And he had become very successful at finding out what the teacher wanted, giving the teacher exactly what they wanted, and doing well. And he didn't want to give that up. And I think that's quite common. If you've nailed the system, why would you want to change? And particularly when you knew that in the new system you might not have the same success that you've had in this reliable, predictable way. So I mean, I understand that. I think that's quite human. And part of the process here is to encourage that student to start to see the importance of developing their own view, that it's what life demands, is that they have to be able to think, what is it that's worth doing? And what is it that's worth doing well? And how do you do that thing well? And can I keep going when the going gets tough to make sure I do it well? That to me is the kind of essence here.
Is there a part of our humanity where there is a temptation to escape from freedom, where it's comfortable to have someone else telling us what to do? And do you think some people are even sort of significantly
I think that's true,
built
but
that
I think
way?
also, like, I go to lectures, I go to hear speakers, and go to movies that I think are going to be informative or helpful. So I use all kinds of sources for developing for finding about what's going on and generating new ideas myself. So I think that's quite reasonable. I think it's also comfortable. Listen, the main thing that you fight when you start teaching self-direction is inertia. And it's also the first thing that the individual fights in becoming self-directed is their own inertia, because inertia is the natural state, and it takes energy, imagination, courage, diligence, and everything like that in order to move forward. One guy, I've forgotten his name now, Preston or something like that, Prescott, wrote a book called The War of Art, and it's about the war we have with our own resistance to taking action. And I think it exists. So yeah, it's comfortable to have the least responsibility possible, but I don't think it's a healthy state.
We have probably time for one or maybe two questions. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat or raise your virtual hand. Some time ago, Sandy asked a question in the chat that I wanted to make sure we got to. She said, what about students who have ADD or some other form of behavioral disorder?
What could be more perfect than a self-directed program?
Good, short answer. Your book is geared toward the traditional school. Sorry, I talked over you.
No, that's okay. Go ahead. I just wanted to say that I didn't mean to be ridiculously brief in that answer. But the elaboration is quite extensive to cope with it. But the fact is that, in my view, the focus on the individual and the focus on the individual's development according to where they are now and moving them forward is exactly what such a person needs.
Sandy wanted to clarify she meant ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. Mr. McConkey asks, I've just started with SDL. What is your number one piece of advice?
What was that?
Someone has just started with student-directed learning. What's your number one piece of advice?
Care about them to the utmost limit of your ability.
I think that's a great place to stop. Maurice, thank you so much for coming on the show. As a courtesy, we do finish on time. This has been terrific.
Well, I hope so. It's off the top of my head, and I hope it's been helpful. It's been a real pleasure talking to you and to your audience.
Thank you so much. The book is the Self-Directed Learning Handbook. And then, am I right, it's self-directedlearner.com?
Self-directed learning.
Self-directedlearning.com.
Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff on that website.
Thanks, Maurice. Thanks, everybody, for attending. I will type in the chat in just a second, self-directedlearning.com. Really a pleasure to have you on the show. Take care, everybody. Good
Thanks
night
so
or good day, depending on where you are. Thanks, Maurice.
Bye for now.
Bye.